The Harrison family estate stood as a monument to success in Pine Creek Valley, Colorado. For 3 generations, they'd built their cattle empire through shrewd business, strategic marriages, and an unflinching adherence to tradition. Their sprawling ranch house overlooked thousands of acres of prime grazing land, where cattle worth a small fortune roamed under the watchful eyes of hired hands. But on a crisp autumn morning beneath the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, the Harrisons made a grievous error in judgment that would echo through the valley for years to come. They rejected Emma Wilson at the train station. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. George Harrison stood on the Pine Creek train platform, his expression darkening as he watched the slender woman descend from the passenger car. She wasn't what he had expected. The advertisement had promised a proper Eastern lady of gentle bearing, versed in domestic arts and seeking the security of marriage in the Western territories. What climbed down from that train was something altogether different. Emma Wilson moved with the fluid grace of a mountain lion, her practical clothing showing signs of careful mending, but designed for utility rather than appearance. A leather satchel was slung across her back, alongside what was unmistakably a disassembled rifle in a worn canvas case. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her eyes, sharp, observant, missing nothing, scanned the platform with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to identifying threats. "Miss Wilson?" George inquired stiffly, already knowing the answer and dreading it. "Mr. Harrison," she acknowledged with a slight nod, her Appalachian accent immediately marking her as no proper Eastern lady. She extended a hand, calloused, strong, capable, that further confirmed George's rapidly solidifying disappointment. The journey from the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina to the Colorado Territory had taken Emma nearly 2 weeks. After her parents' death from fever last winter, the small cabin and hunting grounds that had been her home for 26 years had passed to a distant male cousin according to local custom, despite Emma being the one who had kept the family fed with her hunting skills since she was 12 years old. The mail order arrangement had been her last resort. The carefully saved funds from selling furs and venison over the years, just enough to pay for passage west. The letters exchanged with George Harrison had been cordial if formal. Him describing his successful ranch and desire for a proper wife to help manage the household, her emphasizing her willingness to work hard and adapt to a new life. She had perhaps been selective about which skills she emphasized. "There seems to have been some misunderstanding," George said, looking past Emma to see if perhaps a more suitable woman might still emerge from the train. Finding none, his mouth set in a hard line. "The position I advertised was for a bride suitable for a family of our standing, someone who could manage household staff, host social gatherings, and present a certain appearance to the community." Emma's expression remained neutral, though her eyes flickered briefly with something that might have been hurt before hardening again. "Your letters mentioned needing someone hardy enough for frontier life. I assure you, Mr. Harrison, there's little I can't handle." Martha Harrison, George's sister who had accompanied him to the station, stepped forward with a disapproving sniff. She circled Emma like a buyer inspecting questionable livestock. "Look at her, George, dressed like a trapper, carrying a gun for heaven's sake." Martha's voice dripped with disdain. "Can you imagine presenting her at the governor's dinner next month? She's hardly suitable for Robert." Emma's eyebrows rose slightly at this. The correspondence had mentioned George seeking a bride, not that the bride was intended for his son. Another detail apparently deemed unimportant enough to share with her before she traveled across half the continent. "I believe, Miss Wilson," George said with cold finality, "that we will not be proceeding with our arrangement. There is a clear discrepancy between what was advertised and what has arrived." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small envelope. "This should cover your return fare. The eastbound train departs tomorrow morning." Emma made no move to take the envelope. "Our arrangement included payment for my passage west, which I've used in good faith based on your letters. I have no home to return to, Mr. Harrison." Martha made a dismissive gesture. "Surely there's some appropriate position for someone of your background. Perhaps the mining camps need laundresses." The suggestion hung in the air like a slap. The mining camps were notoriously rough places where unaccompanied women typically had only one profession available to them, and it wasn't doing laundry. Emma's face remained composed, but her hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the strap of her rifle case. "I'll find my own way, then." She turned to leave, then paused. "Though you might want to reconsider what kind of woman survives in these territories, Mr. Harrison. Delicate flowers tend to wither in mountain winters." As Emma walked away, she heard Martha's hushed but deliberately audible comment, "Completely unsuitable. Did you see her hands? Like a man's. And those eyes, assessing everything like some wild predator. Imagine bringing that into our home." Emma continued walking, back straight, eyes forward, refusing to let them see how their rejection stung. She had gambled everything on this opportunity, selling what little she couldn't carry, spending nearly all her savings on the journey. Now she found herself alone in an unfamiliar town, with winter approaching and minimal resources. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very skills that had kept her alive in the Blue Ridge Mountains, hunting, tracking, self-reliance, were precisely what made her unsuitable in the eyes of the Harrisons. They wanted an ornament, not a survivor. Pine Creek Valley spread before her as she left the station, a growing settlement nestled in a valley bordered by towering pines and the distant snow-capped peaks of the Rockies. The main street bustled with the typical businesses of a frontier: town, general store, saloon, blacksmith, small hotel. Beyond the town center, she could see scattered homesteads and the sprawling Harrison Ranch in the distance. Emma took inventory of her situation with the same methodical assessment she would give to tracking conditions or weather patterns before a hunt. She had her rifle and hunting knife. A small amount of money remained from her savings, the clothes on her back and a few spare items in her satchel. Most importantly, she had her skills and the resilience forged through years of surviving in the wilderness. Her immediate needs were clear: shelter and employment. The former would require the latter. Emma headed toward the general store, typically the center of information in small communities like this one. Dawson's General Store occupied a prime corner location in Pine Creek. The bell above the door announced Emma's arrival, drawing the attention of the proprietor, a heavy-set man with a remarkably elaborate mustache and friendly eyes. "Welcome to Pine Creek, miss," he greeted her. "Just arrived on the train, I take it? You must be—" He stopped, recognition dawning. "Ah, you'd be the Harrison bride." News traveled fast in small towns. Emma squared her shoulders. "I'm Emma Wilson, and no, it seems I'm not suitable for the Harrisons after all." The storekeeper had the grace to look embarrassed. "Walter Dawson," he introduced himself. "And forgive me for saying so, but George Harrison has more money than sense if he's sending away a capable woman in these parts." His eyes had noted her rifle case and practical attire, with none of the disdain the Harrisons had shown. "I'm in need of work and a place to stay," Emma said directly. "I don't suppose you know of either available in town." Walter stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Might be Mrs. Finch at the boarding house has a room. As for work, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." He eyed her speculatively. "Can you really use that?" He nodded toward her rifle case. "Since I was 12, Emma replied without boast. "Fed my family through 2 harsh winters and a drought with it." Walter nodded slowly. The butcher, Milo Jenkins, has been complaining about the quality of game the local hunters bring in, half shot up and poorly dressed. Man appreciates proper handling of meat. Might be worth speaking to him. Emma's spirits lifted slightly. At least her skills might have some value here, even if they weren't the domestic arts the Harrisons had expected. There's something else you should know, Walter added, lowering his voice. The Harrisons essentially own this town. George sits on the bank board, the town council, and holds notes on half the businesses here, including mine. If you're staying, you might find yourself swimming against the current. Emma allowed herself a small smile. Fortunately, Mr. Dawson, I've been swimming against currents my entire life. Udais. As Emma left the store with directions to both the boarding house and the butcher shop, she felt a prickling sensation between her shoulder blades, the feeling of being watched. Turning casually as if taking in the town, she spotted a man observing her from the covered porch of what appeared to be a doctor's office across the street. Unlike the other curious onlookers, who quickly averted their gaze when she looked their way, this man continued watching her with unabashed interest. He sat in a wooden chair, one leg extended stiffly before him, a walking cane propped against the wall beside him. Despite his apparently relaxed posture, there was something in his bearing that marked him as different, a alertness, a contained energy that reminded Emma of a predator at rest. His face was partially shadowed by the porch roof, but she could make out a strong jawline and the glint of observant eyes. Emma continued on her way, filing away the observation as she would any other detail of a new environment. Pine Creek Valley, it seemed, would require all her hard-earned survival instincts, just not in the way she had anticipated when she boarded that eastbound train with a marriage agreement in her pocket. Mrs. Finch's boarding house was a well-maintained, two-story structure set slightly back from the main street. The proprietress, a plump widow with shrewd eyes, listened to Emma's situation with unexpected sympathy. The Harrisons have peculiar notions about what makes a suitable woman, Mrs. Finch remarked, showing Emma to a small but clean room on the second floor, especially considering the realities of life out here. You don't seem surprised by their rejection, Emma observed. Mrs. Finch snorted delicately. Third time this year. George keeps sending for these refined Eastern ladies. The first one took one look at the town and got right back on the train. The second lasted a week before declaring she couldn't possibly live in such primitive conditions and demanding passage home. This was illuminating. Yet he rejected me on sight, Emma mused. Because you might actually survive here, Mrs. Finch said with surprising insight. George Harrison wants a porcelain doll to showcase his success, not a partner who might have opinions or capabilities of her own. And his sister Martha encourages it, keeps her position as the leading lady of Pine Creek secure. Emma set her rifle case on the bed and began unpacking her few possessions. I'm hoping to find work with the butcher. Mr. Dawson suggested he might value my hunting skills. Mrs. Finch nodded approvingly. Milo's a fair man, and there's good hunting in the foothills, deer, elk, sometimes mountain lion if they come down from the high country. She hesitated, then added, but you should know that the best hunting grounds are Harrison land. They're particular about trespassers. I've never needed the easy hunting grounds, Emma replied. It's finding the difficult game that hones the skill. Later that afternoon, Emma found herself at Jenkins' butcher shop, where Milo Jenkins, a barrel-chested man with surprisingly delicate hands, listened skeptically to her proposal. No offense, miss, but I've got 3 regular hunters who supply me, he said, arms crossed over his blood-stained apron, all experienced mountain men. When was the last time any of them brought you a clean kill? 1 shot? Minimal meat damage? Properly bled and dressed? Emma asked. Jenkins' eyebrows rose slightly. You talk like someone who knows the trade. Because I do. I can bring you better quality game than you're getting, and I can track what others can't find, Emma stated simply. It wasn't boasting if it was true. Give me a chance to prove it. If I'm wrong, you've lost nothing. Jenkins considered her for a long moment. The first kill is your audition, he finally said. If it meets my standards, we can discuss an arrangement. Emma nodded, satisfied. It was fair, better than fair in a town clearly influenced by the Harrisons' evident disapproval. As she was leaving the butcher shop, a commotion from the direction of the saloon caught her attention. A crowd had gathered, voices raised in alarm. Emma moved closer, her ingrained instinct to understand any disruption in her environment overriding caution. The crowd parted slightly, revealing the cause of the disturbance. A man lay on the boardwalk, his face contorted in pain, clutching his leg where a dark stain was spreading rapidly across his trousers. "Someone get Dr. Miller!" A woman shouted. "He's up at the Harrison place, seeing to Martha's headaches again," someone else responded. The injured man groaned, his face paling as blood continued to seep through his fingers. Emma assessed the situation instantly, recognizing the signs of a serious wound that needed immediate attention. Without hesitation, she moved forward. "Let me through," she said with quiet authority. The crowd, surprised by her confidence, parted. Emma knelt beside the injured man, gently but firmly moving his hands away from the wound. "Hunting knife?" she observed, seeing the clean slice across his thigh. "Deep, but missed the big vessels, or you'd have bled out already." The man stared at her, pain and confusion evident in his eyes. "Who?" "Someone who knows wounds," Emma replied calmly. She reached into her satchel and withdrew a small leather pouch. From it, she took a packet of dried herbs and a clean cloth. "This needs cleaning and pressure. Just with efficient movements learned from years of dressing game and occasional human injuries in her remote mountain community, Emma packed the wound with the herbs, a mixture her grandmother had taught her to use for its ability to slow bleeding and prevent festering, and bound it tightly with the cloth. "He needs to be moved somewhere clean where I can stitch this properly," she announced to the onlookers. "My office is across the street," a deep voice said from behind her. Emma turned to find the man she'd noticed watching her earlier. Up close, she could see he was perhaps in his mid-30s, with the weathered complexion of someone who'd spent years outdoors. His eyes were a striking blue against his sun-darkened skin, and a scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into his collar. He leaned heavily on his cane, but there was nothing weak in his posture or gaze. "You're a doctor?" Emma asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Captain Thomas Miller, formerly of the Union Army, field surgeon for the last 2 years of the war, now just the assistant to Dr. Peterson, who, as mentioned, is unavailable." 2 men from the crowd helped carry the injured man across to Thomas Miller's office, a modest building with Dr. Peterson and Associate painted on the window. Inside was a surprisingly well-equipped examination room, where they laid the wounded man on a table. Thomas Miller moved to a cabinet and began removing supplies: catgut for sutures, carbolic acid, clean bandages. "Your herbal poultice has slowed the bleeding impressively," he observed, examining Emma's handiwork. "Cherokee remedy?" Emma looked up sharply. Few white people recognized native medicine on sight. "My grandmother was half Cherokee," she confirmed. "She taught me their healing ways alongside hunting and tracking." Miller nodded as if this explained something that had puzzled him. "I worked with a Cherokee healer after Shiloh," he said. "Saved more men than our army doctors with their saws and morphine." He gestured to the wound. "Would you do the honors? Your hands are steadier than mine some days." He flexed his right hand, which Emma noticed had a slight tremor. Without comment, Emma washed her hands thoroughly in the basin he provided, then set to work. Her stitches were small, neat, and efficient. The same careful attention she gave to preparing a pelt for market applied now to human flesh. The injured man, who introduced himself through gritted teeth as Patrick Doyle, a local blacksmith, watched her work with a mixture of pain and fascination. "Where'd you learn to stitch like that, miss?" "When you live 2 days' ride from the nearest doctor, you learn to handle what comes," Emma replied, tying off the final suture. "Keep it clean, change the bandage daily, and come back if you see any red streaks moving up your leg." As Patrick was helped out by friends, Thomas Miller regarded Emma with undisguised interest. "You're the mail-order bride the Harrisons rejected this morning," he stated rather than asked. Emma stiffened slightly. "News travels fast." "Pine, Greek has few entertainments beyond gossip," he replied with a slight shrug. "Though I confess I observed the encounter myself. I was at the station seeing off Dr. Peterson's weekly medicine shipment to the mining camps." He paused, then added, "George Harrison is a fool." The blunt assessment startled a small laugh from Emma. "You don't share the town's evident reverence for the Harrison family." Thomas Miller's expression hardened slightly. "I've seen too many battlefields to be impressed by men whose only accomplishment is being born to wealth. The Harrisons have money and power, certainly. Character is another matter entirely." He moved to clean the surgical instruments, his limp more pronounced as he crossed the room. Emma noticed now what she hadn't before. His left leg was rigid from knee to ankle, explaining the cane and stiff gait. "Chancellorsville," he said, catching her glance. "Minier ball shattered my knee. Army surgeons wanted to take the leg. A Cherokee healer disagreed. I kept the leg, but not all its function." Emma appreciated his directness. No self-pity, just facts. "Yet you became a surgeon yourself." "Assistant surgeon," he corrected. "And yes, I had certain insights into patient care after my experience." He finished cleaning the instruments and turned to face her fully. "Miss Wilson, Pine Creek could use someone with your skills. Dr. Peterson is 73 and serves 5 communities. I handle what I can, but there are times when another pair of capable hands would make the difference between life and death." Emma regarded him thoughtfully. "Are you offering me employment, Captain Miller?" "Thomas," he corrected. "And yes, to start, though I suspect your hunting arrangement with Jenkins will prove more profitable, consider this. Supplementary work when needed." He hesitated, then added, "The Harrisons won't approve." "That seems to be becoming a theme in my life," Emma replied dryly. For the first time, Thomas Miller smiled fully, a transformation that softened the hard planes of his face and brought warmth to his eyes. "Then we should get along splendidly, Miss Wilson. I've made something of a career of Harrison disapproval myself." As Emma left the doctor's office, she found herself reconsidering the trajectory her life had taken in a single day. She had arrived in Pine Creek Valley expecting to become a rancher's wife, a role she had been prepared to adapt to despite its unfamiliarity. Instead, she found herself establishing not one but 2 positions that utilized the very skills the Harrisons had deemed unsuitable. The irony was not lost on her. What George Harrison and his sister had rejected as unfeminine and inappropriate might well prove to be exactly what allowed her to thrive in this new place. As Emma walked back to Mrs. Finch's boarding house, she found herself planning tomorrow's hunt with the first genuine optimism she had felt since stepping off the train. Later that evening, as Emma sat on the boarding house porch cleaning her rifle with the methodical care ingrained through years of dependence on its function, she became aware of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw a young man riding a magnificent chestnut gelding, drawing to a stop in front of the house. He was perhaps 25, with the unmistakable Harrison features she had observed in George. The same square jaw and confident bearing that came from a lifetime of privilege. This would be Robert, she surmised, the son she had apparently been imported to marry. "Miss Wilson," he called from horseback, not bothering to dismount. Another telling detail. "I've come to apologize for this morning's misunderstanding." Emma continued her work, neither hurrying nor pausing. "No apology needed, Mr. Harrison. Your father was quite clear that I didn't meet his requirements." Robert Harrison frowned slightly at her lack of deference. "Yes, well, father can be traditional in his views. I've come to offer a solution that might benefit us both." Emma looked up then, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm listening." The younger Harrison shifted uncomfortably under her steady gaze. "Father won't consider you as a bride, that's true, but we have a hunting cabin in the foothills that needs a caretaker. Someone to maintain it, perhaps provide fresh game when we entertain business associates there." His eyes flickered to her rifle, then back to her face. "It would provide you housing and a modest income." The offer was clear in its implication. Not a wife, but a convenient arrangement that would keep her isolated and available without the respect or protection of marriage. Emma had seen similar arrangements in the mining towns back home. Women with few options accepting compromised positions for survival. "That's very thoughtful," Emma replied, her tone neutral. "But I've already secured both housing and employment in town. Mrs. Finch has been most accommodating, and Mr. Jenkins has engaged my hunting skills for his butcher shop." Robert's expression darkened. "Jenkins? You should know that my father holds the note on his business. One word from us would reveal more about your character than mine," Emma interrupted calmly. "Is that how the Harrisons maintain their position in Pine Creek? By threatening people's livelihoods when they don't get their way?" The young man's face flushed with anger. "You're making a mistake, Miss Wilson. Pine Creek isn't kind to women who don't understand their place." Emma returned her attention to her rifle, the message clear. This conversation was over. "I've never had trouble finding my place, Mr. Harrison, though it's rarely where others think it should be." Robert Harrison wheeled his horse around and galloped away, dust rising in his wake. Emma continued her methodical cleaning, but her mind was racing with the implications of this encounter. She had made enemies of the most powerful family in the valley before she'd been in town a full day. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared over the mountains, Emma considered her situation with the same clear-eyed assessment she would give to evaluating hunting terrain. The Harrisons were a threat, certainly, but she had faced worse odds. She had her skills, her strength, and, surprisingly, potential allies in Thomas Miller, Walter Dawson, and Mrs. Finch. Emma Wilson had not traveled across half a continent to be cowed by the disapproval of people who measured worth by appearance and conformity rather than capability. Tomorrow, she would hunt, proving her value to Jenkins. She would continue assisting Thomas Miller when needed, building another avenue of respect and connection in the community. The Harrisons had rejected her for being too skilled in doing so. They had inadvertently set her free to build a life on her own terms, a life that would soon demonstrate exactly how valuable those skills could be in a frontier town where survival often depended on abilities that went far beyond social graces and domestic arts. As Emma finished reassembling her rifle, her thoughts turned to Thomas Miller and the unexpected understanding she had glimpsed in his eyes. Here was a man who had faced his own battles, who valued substance over appearance, who seemed to recognize in her something others missed. It was too soon to know what might develop there, but for the first time since arriving in Pine Creek Valley, Emma felt the stirring of possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the hunt, the Harrisons' potential retaliation, the ongoing need to establish herself in a community primed to view her with suspicion. But tonight, as she looked out over the valley with the mountains rising, Like sentinels in the distance, Emma felt a sense of rightness. This was not the path she had expected, but perhaps it was the one she was meant to find. Dawn came early in the mountains, the first pale light revealing a thin layer of frost coating the landscape. Emma was already awake, dressed in her hunting clothes and preparing her pack with the focused efficiency of long practice. She needed to be successful today, not just for Jenkins' approval, but to establish herself in the eyes of a community that would judge her worth by her ability to contribute. Mrs. Finch provided a simple breakfast of cornbread and strong coffee, watching with approval as Emma checked her ammunition and slipped extra into her pockets. Most hunters head north toward Miller's Ridge, she offered. Game's been scarce there lately, though. Too many men stomping through the woods scaring. Everything off. Emma nodded, grateful for the information. Any suggestions for better grounds that aren't Harrison land? Mrs. Finch considered. East of town, beyond Cooper's Creek, there's a stretch that borders national forest land, not claimed by anyone particular. Rougher country, but might be worth trying. Rough country often means undisturbed game, Emma replied, shouldering her rifle. Thank you, Mrs. Finch. The boarding house proprietress studied her for a moment. You know, most women who find themselves in your situation would be crying into their pillows this morning. Yet here you are, heading out to hunt like you've lived here all your life. Emma paused at the door. Tears don't fill empty stomachs or build new lives, Mrs. Finch. Never did understand the point of them. Well, Mrs. Finch said with a small smile, I believe Pine Creek is about to get considerably more interesting. The town was just stirring as Emma made her way through the streets and toward the eastern trail. A few early risers, shopkeepers, opening their establishments, a milk wagon making deliveries, watched her pass with undisguised curiosity. A woman alone with a rifle was not a common sight, even in a frontier town. Emma ignored the stares, focusing instead on observing the landscape ahead. The trail eastward followed a gentle slope downward before rising again toward a line of hills that marked the edge of the valley. Beyond those hills lay the higher country, the true mountains with their dense forests and abundant wildlife. She had gone perhaps 3 miles when she left the main trail, turning north onto a game path that showed recent deer sign. Emma moved differently now, her entire demeanor shifting into the hunting persona that had sustained her family for years. Each step was placed with deliberate care to minimize sound. Her breathing slowed and deepened. Her senses expanded, absorbing every detail of the surroundings. The wind direction, bird movements, subtle changes in vegetation that might indicate water sources or feeding grounds. By mid-morning, Emma had reached Cooper's Creek, a clear stream running swift and cold from the higher elevations. She paused, studying the banks for sign, and found what she was looking for. Tracks of various ages, showing regular game movement to and from the water. This was a natural crossroads where animals traveled between feeding and bedding areas. Emma selected a position with good sightlines and settled in to wait. Patience was the foundation of successful hunting, something the town's other hunters might not fully appreciate. She remained nearly motionless for over an hour, becoming part of the landscape rather than an intruder in it. Her vigilance was rewarded when a small herd of mule deer emerged cautiously from the tree line across the creek. 4 does and a respectable buck, moving with the measured wariness of wild things, surviving in a world full of predators. Emma waited, controlling her breathing as the deer approached the water. The buck was magnificent, perhaps 4 years old, with a symmetrical rack of 8 points. He would provide exceptional meat, and taking him would leave the breeding does to maintain the herd. Emma slowly, silently, raised her rifle as the buck presented his shoulder, offering a clean shot. To the vital organs, she exhaled halfway, held, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, controlled pressure that ensured accuracy. The crack of the rifle echoed across the valley, and the buck dropped instantly where he stood. A perfect heart shot that meant instant death without suffering, and no chase to retrieve wounded game. The does bounded away in alarm, but Emma's attention remained on her kill. She waited several minutes before approaching, respecting the animal and ensuring it had truly passed. Then she set to work with the practiced efficiency that came from countless similar mornings in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Her knife was razor sharp, the field dressing neat and thorough. Emma worked methodically, removing the internal organs, while preserving the heart and liver, valuable nutritional sources her grandmother had taught her never to waste. She positioned the carcass to allow proper bleeding, then rigged a carrying system using rope from her pack. It would be challenging to transport such a large animal alone, but she had done it many times before. It was late afternoon by the time Emma approached Jenkins' butcher shop. The dressed deer carcass balanced across her shoulders in a firefighter's carry that distributed the weight efficiently. The physical strain was considerable, but her face revealed nothing beyond focused determination as she made her way down the main street of Pine Creek. Her progress drew significant attention. Men stopped their work to stare. Women paused in doorways, expressions ranging from shock to disapproval to reluctant admiration. By the time she reached the butcher shop, a small crowd had gathered to witness this unprecedented spectacle. Milo Jenkins emerged from his shop, wiping his hands. On his apron, his eyebrows rising toward his hairline as he took in the scene. "Good Lord, woman," he exclaimed. "Did you carry that all the way from the hunting grounds yourself?" Emma carefully lowered the deer to the ground in front of his shop. "You said you wanted quality," she replied simply, her breathing only slightly elevated despite the exertion. 8-point buck, single shot through the heart, properly bled and dressed in the field. Jenkins circled the carcass, examining it with professional scrutiny. The clean shot, the expert dressing, the undamaged meat, his initial skepticism visibly transformed into appraisal. "This is exceptional work," he admitted, prodding the flesh with experienced fingers. "Better than anything I've seen in months. Where did you find him?" "East of Cooper's Creek," Emma answered. "The usual hunting grounds are overused. Games learn to avoid them." Jenkins nodded slowly. "Most of our hunters aren't willing to go that far. Too much effort." He straightened up, coming to a decision. "I'll take all you can bring me of this quality. $2 per deer, 3 for elk, depending on size. Fair?" It was more than fair. Nearly double what she had earned for similar. "Game back home." Emma nodded, conscious of the growing crowd witnessing this negotiation. "I'll head out again the day after tomorrow. Need to let the area settle after today's hunt." "A hunter who understands conservation," Jenkins remarked, with approval. "Refreshing." He gestured to his assistant. "Help me get this inside. I want to show you something, Miss Wilson." Inside the shop, Jenkins pointed to several cuts of venison hanging from hooks. "This is what the Sanderson brothers brought in last week. See the bullet fragmentation, the poor bleeding? They rush the process, take sloppy shots, and the meat suffers for it." He moved to Emma's deer, which they had hung on the butcher's rack. "This is what I need. Clean, proper, worth a premium to customers who know the difference." Emma felt a small surge of pride. Her father had taught her the importance of respecting the animals that sustained them, quick, clean kills, and careful processing that honored the sacrifice. "I can supply what you need, Mr. Jenkins, consistently." "I believe you can," he agreed, counting out her payment. "Though I suspect the Harrisons won't take kindly to your success. They've tried to control the meat supply to town for years through their cattle operation." "The Harrisons seem to want to control many things," Emma observed neutrally. Jenkins snorted. "Everything they can, and then some." He handed her the money. "Be careful out there, Miss Wilson. not just of the wildlife. As Emma left the butcher shop, her payment secure in her pocket, she became aware of the whispers and stares that followed her. Her appearance likely explained some of it. Her clothes were stained with blood and soil from the field dressing. Her hair had come partially loose from its braid during the exertion of the hunt and transport. But there was something else in the townspeople's reactions, a reassessment taking place as they reconciled the woman they saw with their preconceptions. She had just started back toward Mrs. Finch's boarding house when a familiar figure stepped into her path. Thomas Miller leaned on his cane, an expression of mingled amusement and admiration on his weathered face. "Quite the entrance, Miss Wilson," he commented. "I believe you've given Pine Creek something new to discuss at dinner tables tonight." "Better than discussing my rejection by the Harrisons, I suppose," Emma replied dryly. Thomas chuckled. "Indeed. Though I should warn you that Robert Harrison was in town earlier, speaking with Sheriff Donnelly. Something about checking for hunting licenses and trespassing on Harrison property." Emma frowned. "I was nowhere near Harrison land." "I don't doubt it," Thomas agreed. "But the sheriff tends to see things through Harrison-tinted spectacles. His election campaign was generously funded by George's contributions." He tapped his cane thoughtfully against the boardwalk. "They'll look for ways to hinder you, now that you've shown yourself capable of independence." "I've dealt with men like the Harrisons before," Emma said. "Different names, same attitudes. They believe power gives them the right to control others' lives." Thomas studied her with those perceptive blue eyes. "Most people in town accommodate them. It's easier than resistance." "I didn't come all this way to live on someone else's terms," Emma replied simply. The doctor nodded as if she had confirmed something he had suspected. "In that case, Miss Wilson, I suggest you join me for dinner tonight. My cabin is just outside town. Nothing grand, but the food is decent, and I find myself in need of conversation that doesn't revolve around the Harrisons' latest pronouncements on how the town should be run." The invitation surprised her. "That's very kind, but I'm hardly presentable for social calls." Thomas waved away her concern. "I spent 2 years in field hospitals where presentable meant not actively bleeding." 7 o'clock? I'll send my wagon. My leg makes walking distances problematic, especially in the evening when it stiffens." Emma found herself agreeing. Though social engagements had never been her priority, there was something refreshingly direct about Thomas Miller that reminded her of her father, a man who said what he meant and valued practical skills over social niceties. Mrs. Finch reacted to the news of Emma's hunting success and dinner invitation with equal enthusiasm. "Jenkins has been complaining about the quality of meat for months," she said, helping Emma wash her hair in preparation for the evening. As for Thomas Miller, she paused meaningfully. "He's kept mostly to himself since coming here after the war. Polite to everyone, but doesn't socialize much. Your dinner invitation is the talk of my afternoon coffee group." Emma looked up, water dripping from her freshly rinsed hair. "You have an afternoon coffee group?" "Deet. 5 widows with nothing better to do than monitor the town's comings and goings," Mrs. Finch confirmed cheerfully. "And I'll tell you something. At least 3 of us had our money on you finding your feet despite the Harrisons, though none of us expected it quite so dramatically or quickly." By 7 o'clock, Emma had done what she could with her limited wardrobe. Her Sunday dress, the only one she owned, had thankfully survived the journey west without too many wrinkles. Her hair, freed from its usual practical braid, fell in waves to the middle of her back. It wasn't the elegant presentation a Harrison bride would have managed, but it was the best she could offer. The wagon arrived precisely on time, driven by a young boy Emma recognized as one of the onlookers from the medical emergency the previous day. "Dr. Miller sent me to fetch you, ma'am," he announced importantly. "I'm Timothy, his assistant. Well, for the horses and such, not the doctoring parts." Emma smiled at the boy's earnest clarification as she climbed into the wagon. "Thank you, Timothy. Have you worked for Dr. Miller long?" "Since last spring when my pa died in the mine collapse," the boy replied matter-of-factly. "Dr. Miller gives me odd jobs so Ma doesn't have to take in extra washing. Says I'm earning my keep, but..." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "I think he just wants to help without making Ma feel like charity." This small insight into Thomas Miller's character reinforced Emma's growing impression of a man whose actions aligned with his stated values, a rarity in her experience. The wagon ride was short, taking them northwest of town along a well-maintained road that eventually branched onto a smaller track leading to a modest cabin set amongst a stand of pines. The cabin was larger than Emma had expected. Not grand by any means, but solidly built with care evident in its construction. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, furnished with comfortable-looking chairs positioned to capture the spectacular view of the valley and mountains beyond. Warm light glowed from the windows, and smoke curled invitingly from the stone chimney. Thomas Miller was waiting on the porch as the wagon approached. He had exchanged his work clothes for a clean shirt and vest, though he maintained the practical appearance of a man who valued function over fashion. His cane was still present, but he seemed to be leaning on it less in the familiar environment of his home. "Miss Wilson," he greeted her, helping her down from the wagon. "Thank you for accepting my impromptu invitation. I fear my social graces have grown rusty from disuse, but the company is sincere if not polished." "Polished company is overrated," Emma replied with a small smile. "I've always preferred substance to shine." Thomas's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Then we should get along famously." He turned to the boy. "Thank you, Timothy. There's a plate for you in the kitchen before you head home." The interior of the cabin revealed Thomas Miller's character as clearly as a written declaration. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with medical texts interspersed with volumes of poetry, history, and natural science. A desk in the corner held neat stacks of papers and medical journals. The furnishings were simple but well crafted, chosen for comfort rather than display. What captured Emma's attention, however, were the large windows clearly designed to frame the mountain views, bringing nature into the living space rather than shutting it out. It was the home of someone who appreciated beauty but had no patience for pretense, a philosophy Emma understood instinctively. "You have a lovely home," she said, meaning it. "Did you build it yourself?" Thomas nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat at the dining table already set for their meal. "After the war, I couldn't face going back east. Too many memories, too much lost." He moved to the kitchen area, returning with a pot of stew that filled the room with appetizing aromas. "Building something with my hands, creating instead of destroying or merely repairing, helped heal parts of me that medicine couldn't reach." The simple admission of vulnerability surprised Emma. Most men she had known would sooner cut off their own arm than admit that war had left wounds beyond the physical. "My father was the same after he returned from the Mexican War," she offered. "Said he needed to create things that would outlast him, to balance what he'd been part of destroying." Thomas served the stew, venison with vegetables from his garden, he explained, and they fell into surprisingly easy conversation. He asked about her hunting techniques, showing genuine interest in her explanations of tracking and shot placement. She inquired about his medical practice, fascinated by his integration of traditional Cherokee remedies with his formal training. "Most doctors would dismiss such knowledge as superstition," Emma observed. "Most doctors haven't watched men die under conventional treatments, while others survived under the care of healers they were taught to dismiss," Thomas replied, a shadow crossing his face. "War has a way of stripping away preconceptions. When you've seen enough suffering, you become less concerned with where healing comes from and more with whether it works." Emma nodded, understanding this practical approach to survival. "My grandmother would have liked you. She had little patience for those who ignored effective remedies simply because they came from unfamiliar traditions. "I'd have welcomed her wisdom," Thomas said. "The Cherokee healer who saved my leg, Running Fox, tried to teach me what he could before we parted ways. But there was so much knowledge, generations of understanding plants and their properties, that I've only begun to grasp." As the evening progressed, Emma found herself sharing more about her life in the Blue Ridge Mountains than she had intended. Her father's early teachings about hunting, her grandmother's lessons in traditional medicine, the years after her parents' deaths, when she had maintained their small homestead alone until her cousin's legal claim forced her westward. "You've lived more life already than most people twice your age," Thomas observed, as they moved to sit by the fire after dinner, the evening chill making the warmth welcome. "Necessity is an effective teacher," Emma replied, "though I admit, arriving here to find myself deemed unsuitable before I'd spoken more than 2 words wasn't part of my plan." Thomas stared into the flames. The Harrisons measure worth by a narrow standard, one that conveniently places them at the pinnacle. They wanted someone who would enhance their social standing, not challenge their assumptions about a woman's proper role. "And what do you think a woman's proper role is, Dr. Miller?" Emma asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. He considered the question with the same thoughtfulness he'd shown throughout their conversation. "I think capability determines role more than gender ever could. I've seen women perform surgery in field hospitals with steadier hands than career physicians. I've seen men tenderly nurse the wounded with more compassion than any stereotypical maternal figure." He looked directly at her. "The notion that your hunting skills somehow make you less feminine is absurd. They make you more capable, nothing more or less." The simple understanding in his statement affected Emma more deeply than she expected. After a lifetime of navigating others' expectations of what a woman should be, Thomas Miller's straightforward acceptance of her abilities for what they were, valuable skills, neither masculine nor feminine, felt like finding solid ground after years of shifting sand. The conversation turned to the town and its dynamics. Thomas proved to be an insightful observer of Pine Creek's social structure, explaining connections and histories that would have taken Emma months to unravel on her own. "The Harrisons weren't always the power here," he explained. 20 years ago, this valley was primarily mining country, silver and some copper. George Harrison's father arrived with capital from Eastern investors and began buying land when the easy ore started running out and miners moved on. Consolidated small holdings into the ranch you see today. Strategic timing, Emma noted, and not entirely ethical methods, from what I've heard, Thomas added. George continued his father's approach, expanding whenever someone faced financial difficulty. The drought 3 years ago nearly broke several smaller ranches, convenient for Harrison interests. And no one challenges them? Thomas's expression grew serious. Those who tried found themselves facing sudden bank recalls on loans, cancelled. Supply contracts, influential friends turning their backs. Pine Creek may look like a typical frontier town, but it operates more like a feudal estate with the Harrisons as the lords. Until someone comes along who doesn't need their approval or resources, Emma mused. Thomas studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. A dangerous position, but also potentially powerful. You represent something they can't easily control, a person of genuine skill existing outside their system of patronage and permission. As the evening drew to a close, Emma found herself reluctant to leave. The easy conversation, the mutual respect, the absence of pretense, all created an atmosphere she hadn't experienced since her parents' deaths. Thomas Miller saw her clearly, neither diminishing her because of her gender, nor treating her as an oddity because of her skills. When Timothy arrived with the wagon to return her to town, Thomas accompanied her to the porch. "I've enjoyed this evening immensely, Miss Wilson," he said, the formality of his words belied by the warmth in his voice. "Perhaps we might make it a regular occurrence? I find myself with a surplus of venison stew most weeks and a deficit of intelligent conversation." "I'd like that," Emma replied honestly, "though you should know that associating with me might not help your standing with the Harrisons." Thomas laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his serious features. "Miss Wilson, if my standing with the Harrisons were any lower, I'd need a mining elevator to find it. George has despised me since I refused to declare his sister's nervous condition grounds for special treatments imported from Denver at the town's expense." As the wagon pulled away, Emma glanced back to see Thomas still standing on his porch, firelight from the cabin windows casting his tall figure in silhouette against the night sky. The evening had given her something unexpected, not just a potential ally in her new life, but a glimpse of connection she hadn't realized she was missing. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for Emma to explore more of the surrounding area before her next hunt. She had risen early, as was her habit, and found Mrs. Finch already in the kitchen preparing breakfast for her boarders. "You were out late," the landlady observed with a barely concealed smile. "Dr. Miller and I had much to discuss," Emma replied neutrally, though she suspected her attempt at casualness fooled no one. "I imagine you did," Mrs. Finch agreed, sliding a generous portion of eggs and bacon onto Emma's plate. "Thomas Miller hasn't invited anyone to his home for dinner since he arrived in Pine Creek. Not even Dr. Peterson has received that honor." Before Emma could respond to this revelation, the boarding house door burst open, and Walter Dawson from the general store rushed in, his elaborate mustache quivering with agitation. "Miss Wilson," he exclaimed, "you should know Sheriff Donnelly is on his way here with papers from the town council, something about hunting regulations and permits." Emma set down her fork calmly. "Thank you for the warning, Mr. Dawson. Do you happen to know what specific regulations they're claiming I've violated?" Walter twisted his hat in his hands. "New ordinance, apparently, passed in an emergency council session last night. No hunting licenses to be issued to," he hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, "to unmarried women without a male relative as sponsor." Mrs. Finch slammed a cast-iron pan onto her stove with unnecessary force. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. There's no such law in any civilized territory." "There is now," Walter said grimly, "at least in Pine Creek. George Harrison called in favors from every council member who owes him. It's legally questionable, but by the time it could be challenged in territorial court, winter would have arrived and any chance of establishing myself as a hunter would be gone." Emma finished for him, understanding immediately the strategy behind the move. The Harrisons hadn't confronted her directly. They had simply changed the rules of the game while appearing to follow legal procedures. "What will you do?" Mrs. Finch asked, concern evident in her normally cheerful face. Emma considered her options with the same methodical assessment she applied to tracking conditions. "First, I need to understand exactly what this new ordinance prohibits and what it permits. Rules often contain exceptions or unintended gaps." Walter nodded approvingly. "Sheriff should be here within the hour with the official notice, though I suspect Jenkins isn't going to be happy about losing his new supplier so quickly." Emma's thoughts turned to the butcher who had agreed to purchase her game. "Mr. Dawson, would you mind asking Mr. Jenkins to meet me at the boarding house as soon as possible? I believe we may need to renegotiate our arrangement." After Walter departed on this errand, Emma quickly finished her breakfast and changed into her day clothes. By the time Sheriff Donnelly arrived, she was sitting calmly on the boarding house porch, outwardly composed despite the anger simmering beneath her controlled exterior. Sheriff Donnelly was a portly man with a florid complexion that suggested an overindulgence in the saloon's offerings. He approached the boarding house with visible discomfort, clearly unhappy with his assigned task, but unwilling to defy Harrison interests. "Miss Wilson," he began without preamble, "I'm here on official business to inform you of a new town ordinance regarding hunting permits within Pine Creek jurisdiction." He thrust a document toward her with obvious reluctance. Emma accepted the paper and read it carefully, aware that Mrs. Finch had emerged from the house to stand supportively behind her chair. The ordinance was indeed as Walter had described. Hunting permits would no longer be issued to unmarried women without the sponsorship of a male relative residing in the territory. The document bore the signatures of all 7 town council members, with George Harrison's bold scrawl prominently positioned at the top. "I see," Emma said, keeping her voice neutral. "And this ordinance was passed when exactly, Sheriff?" Donnelly shifted uncomfortably. "Emergency session last night. Concerns. About safety, you understand. Women alone in the wilderness, dangerous animals, potential outlaws." "How fascinating that these concerns developed immediately after I demonstrated successful hunting skills," Emma observed. "One might almost suspect the timing wasn't coincidental." The sheriff flushed deeper. "I'm just doing my job, miss. The ordinance is effective immediately. Any hunting without proper permits will result in fines or possible jail time." He touched his hat briefly, clearly eager to conclude the unpleasant encounter. "Good day to you." As Donnelly retreated down the street, Milo Jenkins approached. From the opposite direction, his expression thunderous as he climbed the porch steps. "Dawson told me what's happening," he said without greeting. "Dirty business, this. I've already lost my morning deliveries from the Sanderson brothers. Suddenly, they're exclusive to the Harrison Ranch Hotel." He spat over the porch railing, his disgust evident. "Didn't take George long to remind them who controls the banknotes on their equipment." Emma nodded, understanding the pressure the Harrisons could exert throughout the community. "Mr. Jenkins, I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement." "I'm listening," the butcher said, folding his arms across his chest. "The ordinance prohibits me from hunting without a male sponsor," Emma explained. "It doesn't prohibit me from processing game or transporting it. What if I were to partner with someone who already has a hunting permit, but lacks my skills in proper field dressing and meat handling?" Jenkins' eyebrows rose as he considered the suggestion. "Might work, especially if that partner were to handle the legal aspects while you handled the actual hunting." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I know just the man, Billy Tanner. Got a valid hunting license and permission to supply local businesses, but his shooting is terrible and his dressing worse. Half the meat he brings in is damaged. Would he agree to such an arrangement? For a fair split of the profits? Absolutely. Billy's not proud. He knows his limitations." Jenkins smiled for the first time. "The Harrisons won't like it, but the arrangement would technically comply with their new ordinance." Emma felt a small surge of satisfaction. The Harrisons had attempted to block her path, but had only succeeded in forcing her to find a creative detour. "When can I meet Mr. Tanner?" "He'll be at the saloon by noon, most likely. I'll make the introductions." Jenkins hesitated, then added more seriously, "You should know, Miss Wilson, crossing the Harrisons this way won't be the end of it. They don't take kindly to people finding loopholes in their plans." "I'm aware of the risks," Emma acknowledged, "but I didn't travel all this way to surrender at the first obstacle." After Jenkins departed, Mrs. Finch placed a supportive hand on Emma's shoulder. "You're handling this with more grace than most would manage," she observed. "Though I wouldn't be surprised if Thomas Miller could be persuaded to sponsor your hunting permit directly. He seems quite taken with you." Emma shook her head. "Dr. Miller has already positioned himself against Harrison interests. I won't use his friendship to draw him further into conflict." She carefully refolded the ordinance notice. Besides, this isn't just about my ability to hunt. It's about establishing that I won't be controlled through arbitrary rules designed specifically to limit me. Mrs. Finch studied her with newfound respect. You're not just looking to survive here, are you? You're looking to truly live on your own terms. Aren't they the same thing? Emma asked simply. Her meeting with Billy Tanner proved surprisingly straightforward. The man was in his 50s, weather-beaten and wiry, with the practical manner of someone who measured words by their utility rather than their impression. Jenkins says you can shoot better than most men and dress a kill proper, he stated after introductions in the quieter back corner of the saloon. That true? It is, Emma confirmed without false modesty. Good. My eyes ain't what they used to be, and my hands shake too much for fine knife work these days. He took a swig of his beer. Terms? Equal split of earnings. You hold the permit and transport the game into town. I do the tracking, shooting, and field dressing, Emma proposed. We both benefit from higher quality, bringing better prices from Jenkins. Billy considered for approximately 5 seconds before extending his hand. Deal. When do we start? Tomorrow morning, Emma decided. There's a promising area east of Cooper's Creek I'd like to explore further. With their arrangement settled, Emma left the saloon, conscious of curious glances following her. Word of the new ordinance had clearly spread through town, along with speculation about her response to it. She had just stepped onto the boardwalk when she nearly collided with Martha Harrison, George's sister, emerging from the dressmaker's shop. Martha drew back as if contact with Emma might contaminate her expensive clothes. Miss Wilson, she acknowledged coldly. Still in Pine Creek, I see. I'd have thought you'd have the good sense to move on by now. Good sense tells me to stay precisely where I'm not wanted, Emma replied with deliberate pleasantness. It usually means I'm exactly where I need to be. Martha's pinched features tightened further. This community has standards, Miss Wilson. Standards that include knowing one's proper place and role. Fascinating, Emma observed. In my experience, those most concerned with proper places are those who fear they couldn't maintain their position without artificial rules to protect it. The older woman's face flushed with anger. You think you're clever finding ways around our ordinances, but Pine Creek has been Harrison territory for 20 years. We know how to deal with disruptive elements. Is that what I am? Emma asked. A disruptive element, simply because I hunt to support myself instead of depending on a man's provision. You're disruptive because you encourage others to question established order, Martha replied, lowering her voice as she stepped closer. Already the Finch woman is speaking out against the council. Miller is openly criticizing George's leadership. Even Jenkins is defying direct suggestions about his suppliers. Her eyes narrowed. People who were content with their place are suddenly restless, and it began with your arrival. The assessment was unexpectedly perceptive, and Emma realized Martha Harrison was far more observant than her brother. Perhaps they were never truly content, only resigned, she suggested. Sometimes it takes seeing someone else stand up to remember you can do the same. Martha adjusted her shawl with hands that trembled slightly with suppressed emotion. My brother believes you'll eventually give up and leave when enough obstacles are placed in your path. I disagree. She met Emma's gaze directly. I think you'll need to be driven out more forcefully for the good of Pine Creek's stability. The threat was unmistakable, but Emma had faced worse than a society woman's disapproval. Mrs. Harrison, I grew up in mountains where winter kills the unwary and predators take the weak. I've faced down mountain lions and survived blizzards that buried our cabin to the windowsills. If you think social pressure will succeed where nature failed, you fundamentally misunderstand what makes a person resilient. Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. We shall see, Miss Wilson. We shall see. She swept past, expensive fabric rustling as she made her way toward the waiting Harrison carriage. Emma watched her go, considering this new development. Martha Harrison was potentially more dangerous than her brother. She saw clearly what Emma represented to the carefully constructed social order that kept the Harrison family in power. Not just a woman who hunted, but a symbol of independence that might inspire others to question their acceptance of Harrison dominance. Later that afternoon, Emma made her way to Thomas Miller's office, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. She found him reviewing patient notes at his desk, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose in a way that softened his otherwise rugged appearance. He looked up as she entered, a smile warming his features. "Miss Wilson, I was just thinking about our conversation last night." "As was I," Emma replied. "I brought you something, a small thank you for dinner." She placed the package on his desk. Thomas unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small leather pouch filled with dried herbs. "Cherokee healing mixture?" he guessed, examining the contents with interest. Emma nodded. "My grandmother's recipe for wound healing and infection prevention. I noticed your supplies were running low when we treated Mr. Doyle." "This is tremendously valuable," Thomas said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "Thank you." He studied her expression. "But I suspect you didn't come across town solely to deliver herbs. You've had a confrontation with the Harrisons." Emma wasn't surprised by his perception. News travels fast. Timothy's mother works laundry at the Harrison Ranch Hotel. She overheard Martha Harrison instructing the staff not to serve or assist. "You in any way?" He set aside the herbs. "Will you tell me what happened?" Emma explained the new hunting ordinance and her solution with Billy Tanner, as well as her encounter with Martha Harrison. Thomas listened without interruption, only the tightening of his jaw revealing his anger at the situation. "They're escalating more quickly than I expected," he observed when she finished. "Martha especially is dangerous. She understands community dynamics in ways George doesn't. If she's decided you're a threat to Harrison authority, she'll be systematic in trying to isolate you." "I've survived isolation before," Emma said. "Not like this," Thomas warned. "Martha controls the social fabric of Pine Creek. She can make sure no one hires you, serves you, helps you in any way. It's a small community. People depend on each other, which means they're vulnerable to pressure." Emma considered this assessment. "You think I should leave?" "No," Thomas replied instantly. "I think you should fight, but strategically, not reactively." He rose from his desk, moving to stare out the window at the town's main street. "The Harrisons maintain control because people believe they have no alternative. Individual resistance is easily crushed. Collective resistance requires a catalyst." "Duh, and you think I'm that catalyst?" Emma asked skeptically. Thomas turned to face her. "I think you've already begun the process without intending to. Your partnership with Billy Tanner, your medical assistance with Patrick Doyle, your straightforward competence that defies what the Harrisons insist a woman should be. People are watching, Miss Wilson, and some are reconsidering their acceptance of Harrison authority. That's a heavy responsibility to place on someone who's been in town 3 days, Emma observed. Thomas smiled. 3 days that have generated more conversation about Harrison overreach than the previous 3 years. You've made an impression, whether you intended to or not. As Emma walked back to the boarding house, she reflected on Thomas's words. She hadn't come to Pine Creek seeking conflict or looking to challenge established power. She had simply sought a place to build a new life using the skills she possessed. Yet conflict had found her anyway, precisely because those skills didn't fit neatly into the role the community's powerful family believed women should occupy. The following morning, Emma met Billy Tanner at the Eastern Trail before dawn. Itim. Older man was surprisingly punctual, his horse loaded with basic supplies, and his rifle, well worn but clearly well maintained, slung across his back. "Morning, Miss Wilson," he greeted her gruffly. "Jenkins says you know where the good hunting is. I'll follow your lead." It was a remarkable statement from a man of his generation, and Emma appreciated the straightforward acceptance of her expertise. "We'll head northeast today," she decided. "There's a meadow beyond the ridge that should offer good sight lines." They rode in comfortable silence as the eastern sky gradually lightened. Billy proved to be an experienced woodsman in his own right, moving quietly and following Emma's signals without question. When they reached the meadow she had identified, he helped set up their position without being asked, demonstrating an understanding of wind direction and cover that spoke to years of hunting experience. "Your eyes may not be what they were," Emma observed, "but your instincts are still sharp." Billy shrugged. "Been hunting these mountains 40 years, some things you don't forget." He settled into position beside her. "Wasn't always this way, though. Used to be I could drop a deer at 300 yards. Now I'm lucky to hit something at half that distance." "Age comes for us all eventually," Emma said. "That it does. But it's a poor hunter who can't adapt. When circumstances change." He glanced at her with surprising insight. "Reckon that's true for more than just hunting." Their patience was rewarded when a group of elk emerged at the far end of the meadow shortly after sunrise. Emma identified a mature bull with an impressive rack and several cows. She waited, gauging distance and wind, before shouldering her rifle. "May I?" Billy asked, not moving to take the shot himself, but clearly interested in observing her technique. Emma nodded, settling into position. Her breathing slowed, her focus narrowing to the target as she had been taught from childhood. The rifle cracked, and the bull elk dropped where it stood, another clean heart shot that meant instant death. Billy let out a low whistle of admiration. "Damn fine shooting," he said simply. "Never seen better. Man or woman." They approached, the fallen elk cautiously, as was proper hunting practice. Emma examined her handiwork with professional satisfaction. The bullet had found its mark perfectly, ensuring the animal hadn't suffered and the meat remained undamaged. "I'll dress it," she said, removing her knife from its sheath. "If you'll keep watch. Mountain lions sometimes investigate fresh kills." Billy took up a position with his back to her, rifle ready, scanning the surrounding forest while Emma worked. Her movements were efficient and practiced, waste minimized, valuable organs preserved. Despite the size of the animal, she completed the field dressing in less than 30 minutes. "That's impressive work," Billy commented as she finished. "Most hunters I know rush this part, spoil half the meat in the process." "My father taught me that respectful handling honors the animal's sacrifice," Emma explained, washing her hands. "A knife in a nearby stream. A clean kill and proper dressing means nothing is wasted." Together, they prepared the elk for transport, using Billy's horse to carry the substantial weight back toward town. The partnership was working well. Billy's permit provided the legal coverage, while Emma's superior shooting and processing skills ensured they would receive top price from Jenkins. They were within sight of Pine Creek when they encountered a Harrison Ranch patrol. 4 mounted men blocking the trail, their expressions hostile. Emma recognized Robert Harrison among them, his expensive riding clothes and superior horse setting him apart from the ranch hands who accompanied him. "Tanner," Robert acknowledged coldly, ignoring Emma completely. "What have we here?" Billy shifted uncomfortably but held his ground. "Hunting expedition, Mr. Harrison. Got the permits right here." He reached slowly into his coat pocket and produced the official documentation. Robert examined the papers with exaggerated care. "Everything appears in order for you, Tanner, but I don't see anything authorizing Miss Wilson's participation." "Don't need separate authorization for field dressing," Billy replied. "Ordnance only covers the actual hunting." Robert's face darkened. Don't play games, old man. We all know who really shot this elk. He turned to Emma, finally acknowledging her presence. Miss Wilson seems determined to undermine the council's authority at every turn. The council's authority? Emma asked, her voice deliberately calm. Or Harrison authority wearing the council's mask? The ranch hands exchanged uncomfortable glances at her directness. Few people in Pine Creek spoke so bluntly to a Harrison. Robert dismounted, moving to inspect the elk carcass draped across Billy's horse. Remarkable clean shot, he observed, almost as if it came from a professional hunter rather than a man whose hands shake too badly to pour his own whiskey at the saloon. He looked up at Billy. How much is she paying you to put your name on her kills, Tanner? Billy's weathered face remained impassive. We're partners, Mr. Harrison. Equal share of work according to our abilities. Nothing in the law against that. Perhaps not, Robert conceded, but laws can be clarified when necessary. He stepped back. You can proceed for now, but consider this a warning. The council won't tolerate obvious attempts to circumvent its ordinances. He remounted his horse with practiced ease. Good day, Tanner. Again, he deliberately excluded Emma from the courtesy. As the Harrison men rode off, Billy let out a long breath. That could have gone worse, he observed. It will get worse, Emma predicted. They'll move to close this loophole next. Billy nodded grimly. Likely so. Harrisons don't like being outmaneuvered. He clicked to his horse, urging it forward. Best get this meat to Jenkins before they find another way to interfere. Jenkins was delighted with the quality of the elk and paid them generously as promised. As Emma was leaving the butcher shop with her share of the payment, she noticed increased activity around the town hall, council members arriving for what appeared to be another special session. Walter Dawson intercepted her before she could return to the boarding house. Thought you should know, he said without preamble. Harrison's called another emergency council meeting. Word is they're amending the hunting ordinance to prohibit partnerships like yours with Billy. Emma had expected this development, though perhaps not quite so quickly. Thank you for the warning, Mr. Dawson. That's not all, the storekeeper continued, lowering his voice. Martha Harrison's been visiting shopkeepers all morning, making it clear that anyone who serves you or does business with you will find themselves cut off from Harrison's suppliers and financing. So the isolation campaign had begun, just as Thomas had predicted. How many will comply with her demands? Walter looked pained. Most have little choice, Miss Wilson. The Harrisons control the supply wagons from Denver, the bank financing, the water rights for half the businesses in town. Defying them means risking everything. And you, Mr. Dawson, will you turn me away from your store? The storekeeper straightened his shoulders. My store may have Harrison financing, but my conscience doesn't. You'll always be welcome at Dawson's General Store, Miss Wilson, whatever Martha Harrison might say. He tugged at his mustache uncomfortably, though I may not be the norm in that regard. Emma thanked him for both the information and his courage, then continued to the boarding house. The atmosphere in town had noticeably shifted. People who had greeted her with curious interest the previous day now avoided her gaze or crossed the street to avoid passing near her. The Harrison influence was pervasive and powerful, a reminder of exactly what she was challenging by refusing to conform to their expectations. Mrs. Finch was waiting on the boarding house porch, her usually cheerful face solemn. I've had a visit from Martha Harrison herself, she announced without preamble. Emma's heart sank. Mrs. Finch had been her first ally in Pine Creek. If the boarding house was now closed to her, I understand if you need to ask me to leave, she began. Mrs. Finch snorted indignantly. Ask you to leave? Certainly not. I told Martha Harrison exactly what she could do with her friendly suggestions about my choice of boarders. She lifted her chin defiantly. This house was built by my husband's hands, and the mortgage was paid off 5 years ago. The Harrisons have no hold over me. Relief washed through Emma. At least she still had a place to sleep. "Thank you, Mrs. Finch, but you should know that associating with me may bring Harrison disapproval on your other boarders as well." "Let it," the landlady declared. "It's time someone stood up to them, and I'm pleased to join the ranks." She gestured toward the street where Thomas Miller was approaching, his cane tapping rhythmically on the wooden sidewalk. "And it seems I'm not the only one." Thomas climbed the porch steps with his characteristic careful movement. "Miss Wilson, Mrs. Finch. I see Martha's been making her rounds." He nodded toward the town hall, where the council meeting appeared to be in progress. "They'll announce the amended ordinance by evening. No partnerships for hunting allowed without explicit council approval." "As expected," Emma acknowledged. "How did you hear about it so quickly?" A small smile touched Thomas's lips. "Timothy's older brother sweeps the town hall. Excellent hearing, that boy, especially when discussions involve a certain skilled hunter who's been causing Harrison consternation." Mrs. Finch invited them both inside for coffee, and they settled in her parlor to discuss the rapidly evolving situation. Thomas confirmed Walter's report about Martha Harrison's campaign to isolate Emma from town services and businesses. "It's remarkably comprehensive," he observed. "General store, restaurants, laundry, church meetings, she's systematically cutting off every aspect of community life. Only those independent of Harrison influence can resist, and there are precious few in that position." "Like yourself," Emma noted. Thomas nodded. "My practice isn't dependent on Harrison approval. Most of my patients are miners and homesteaders who care more about getting proper treatment than about who's in Martha Harrison's good graces." "And me," Mrs. Finch added stoutly. "My boarding house is paid for, and I have enough saved to weather whatever storm they create." "Walter Dawson seemed willing to defy them as well," Emma said. "Temporarily," Thomas cautioned, "but the Harrisons hold his store's mortgage. They can call in the loan whenever they choose." Emma considered their situation with the same clear-eyed assessment she would give to challenging hunting conditions. "So I have shelter at Mrs. Finch's, medical care from Dr. Miller, general supplies from Dawson's store, at least for now. But my hunting partnership with Billy will be outlawed by evening, cutting off my primary means of income." "And that's their strategy," Thomas agreed. "Incrementally remove your ability to support yourself, while simultaneously isolating you socially, until leaving becomes your only viable option." "Unless we change the game entirely," Mrs. Finch interjected, setting down her coffee cup with surprising force. "The Harrisons maintain control because they've convinced everyone resistance is futile. But what if enough people decided simultaneously that they were no longer willing to be controlled?" Thomas looked at her with new respect. Collective action rather than individual defiance. It could work if enough people were willing to take the risk. "The question is," Emma said thoughtfully, "what would create sufficient motivation for people to risk Harrison retaliation? What matters more to them than the security of following established patterns?" The three fell silent, contemplating this fundamental question. What could possibly be important enough to outweigh the very real risks of challenging the family that controlled virtually every aspect of life in Pine Creek Valley? The answer, when it came, arrived in the form of Timothy bursting through the boarding house door, his young face flushed with exertion and alarm. "Dr. Miller!" he gasped. "Come quick! There's been a cave-in at the Silver Creek mine, dozens trapped, and they're saying the support timbers were rotted through." Thomas, stop the wagon and quickly assess the situation. I'll examine the seriously injured. Can you triage the walking wounded? Determine who needs immediate attention versus those who can wait. Emma nodded, already scanning the chaotic scene with practiced efficiency. I'll need clean water and any available bandages. They worked in tandem, moving among the injured miners with focused determination. Emma's experience treating injuries in remote mountain areas proved invaluable as she quickly assessed men for broken bones, lacerations, and breathing difficulties. Her knowledge of herbal remedies supplemented Thomas's more conventional treatments, particularly when his limited supply of pain medications began running low. Pack this with the willow bark mixture, she instructed a miner's wife who was helping bind a deep gash on her husband's arm. It will reduce pain and prevent festering. The woman followed her directions without question, desperation overriding any skepticism about frontier medicine. As Emma worked, she gathered information about what had happened. The cave-in had occurred in the main shaft approximately 200 yards into the mountainside. Support timbers that should have been replaced months ago had finally given way under pressure, trapping miners in several adjacent tunnels. Foreman reported the rot 3 times, one dust-covered miner told her as she cleaned debris from a head wound. Mr. Harrison's office said replacements were too costly with current silver prices, told us to shore up what we could and keep digging. Similar stories emerged from other miners, repeated warnings ignored, safety measures postponed, equipment maintenance delayed. All to preserve the profit margins that maintained the Harrison lifestyle and influence. Thomas appeared beside Emma as she finished bandaging a young miner's crushed hand. His face was grim, streaked with dust and sweat. 3 dead already, he reported quietly, and at least 15 still trapped inside. The rescue crews are having difficulty reaching them because of continuing collapses. What can we do? Emma asked. Keep treating those they bring out, Thomas replied, and pray they reach the trapped men before the air runs out. He glanced toward the mine entrance, where rescue workers were frantically clearing debris. George Harrison has arrived. Apparently someone sent word to the ranch. Emma followed his gaze to see George Harrison conferring with mine officials, his expression thunderous. Even from a distance, it was clear he was more concerned with assigning blame than with rescue efforts. He's worried about liability, Thomas observed cynically, not his workers. They returned to treating the injured, working steadily as more men were brought from the mine. Some had relatively minor injuries, cuts, bruises, and sprains. Others suffered from more serious trauma, broken bones, crushing injuries, and the effects of dust inhalation. Emma was applying a splint to a miner's broken ankle when she heard raised voices near the mine entrance. Looking up, she saw George Harrison engaged in a heated argument with the rescue coordinator. "It's too dangerous," Harrison was shouting. "I won't authorize further rescue attempts when the entire shaft could collapse at any moment." The rescue coordinator, a veteran miner named Callahan, stood his ground. "There are still men alive in there, Mr. Harrison. We can hear them tapping on the pipes. We're not abandoning them." "I own this mine, Callahan," Harrison retorted, his face flushing with anger. "And I say the rescue efforts end now before we lose more men. Those still inside understood the risks of mining." A horrified murmur ran through the crowd of miners' families. Emma caught Thomas's eye, seeing her own disbelief reflected there. Harrison was proposing to seal the mine with living men still trapped inside, men whose entrapment resulted directly from his company's negligence. "He can't do that," a woman near Emma whispered, clutching her shawl with white-knuckled hands. "My Jacob is still in there." Before Emma could respond, Thomas was moving toward the confrontation, his limp more pronounced with fatigue, but his bearing still commanding. "Mr. Harrison," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "As the medical authority present, I must inform you that abandoned rescue efforts would constitute criminal negligence under territorial law, especially given the documented reports of inadequate safety measures." Harrison turned, his expression darkening further when he recognized Thomas. "This isn't a medical decision, Miller. It's a business decision, my business. It's a human decision, Thomas countered, unintimidated, and one that will be reported to the territorial governor's office if you proceed. I've been documenting safety violations at this mine for months, as Dr. Peterson can confirm. A tense silence fell over the scene. Even Harrison seemed momentarily taken aback by the direct challenge. Emma moved to stand beside Thomas, lending silent support to his confrontation. Harrison's gaze flickered to her, recognition and disdain evident in his expression. Miss Wilson, I might have known you'd be involved in this interference. He turned back to the rescue coordinator. You have 2 hours to reach the trapped miners. After that, I'm sealing the shaft to prevent further collapse that might endanger the entire operation. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something. The rescue teams immediately resumed their frantic efforts, working against the clock that Harrison had imposed. Emma and Thomas returned to treating the injured, but now there was an additional urgency to their work. He'll do it, Thomas said quietly as they prepared more bandages. In 2 hours, he'll seal that mine, whether they've reached everyone or not. His reputation matters more to him than those men's lives. Emma considered the situation with the same strategic assessment she applied to hunting. Then we need to ensure the rescue succeeds within his timeline. She approached Callahan, the rescue coordinator, who was directing men to clear a particularly challenging section of debris. Mr. Callahan, she began, I grew up in mining country. My father worked rescue operations after cave-ins. Is there a secondary access to those tunnels? A ventilation shaft, perhaps? Callahan looked surprised by her question, then thoughtful. There's an old air shaft about 50 yards east of the main entrance. Hasn't been used since we expanded the main ventilation system last year. He shook his head. But it's narrow, barely wide enough for a man to fit through, and we don't know if it's still connected to the area where they're trapped. Do you have the mine schematics? Emma asked. Callahan led her to a makeshift table where maps were spread out, showing the labyrinthine network of tunnels that comprised Silver Creek Mine. Emma studied them intently, her hunter's eye recognizing patterns in the seemingly chaotic layout. Here, she said, pointing to a narrow passage on the diagram. This ventilation shaft intersects with Tunnel 4, which connects to the main shaft just beyond the collapse point. If it's still intact, a small rescue team could reach the trapped miners from behind, while your main team continues clearing the primary entrance. Callahan examined her proposed route with growing excitement. It could work, if the shaft is navigable and if the connecting tunnels haven't collapsed as well. He looked at Emma with new respect. That's solid mining knowledge for someone who's not a miner. When your father comes home with stories of men saved and lost, you learn to understand what he's talking about, Emma replied simply. Callahan immediately began organizing a secondary rescue team while continuing the main clearing effort. Emma returned to Thomas, who had observed her intervention with evident admiration. That was impressive, he commented, though I suspect George Harrison won't appreciate your contribution to circumventing his timeline. I imagine he's becoming accustomed to my inconvenient interventions, Emma replied dryly. The next hour passed in tense activity. Emma continued treating injured miners while periodically checking on the progress of both rescue attempts. The secondary team had located the old ventilation shaft and confirmed it was still possible, though barely. The narrowness of the access point meant only the smallest miners could attempt the rescue. We need someone who can navigate tight spaces, Callahan explained to the gathered rescuers, and who won't panic if things get cramped in there. I'll go, Emma said, stepping forward before she had fully processed the decision. I'm smaller than any of your men, and I've navigated cave systems in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Her offer was met with predictable resistance, not just from the miners, who were unaccustomed to women in such situations, but from Thomas as well. Emma "This is extremely dangerous," he argued, using her first name for the first time in their acquaintance. "Cave-ins are unpredictable. The air could be toxic. The shaft could collapse." "All true," she acknowledged, "and equally true for anyone else who volunteers. But I have the best chance of fitting through the narrowest sections, and I know what to look for in unstable geological conditions." She met his concerned gaze steadily. "Those men have families, Thomas, just like my father did. I couldn't save him when our cabin roof collapsed in that blizzard, but maybe I can help save someone else's father today." The personal revelation silenced his objections. Thomas studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once, respecting her decision, even as concern remained evident in his eyes. Callahan was more practical in his assessment. "Can you follow mining signals? 3 taps for direction questions, 2 for affirmative, 1 for negative, continuous rapid tapping for emergency." "I can," Emma confirmed, "and I'll need a small medical kit to take with me. The trapped miners may need immediate treatment before they can be moved." Preparations were made quickly. Emma changed into borrowed clothing, trousers and a shirt from a miner's young son that fit her slender frame adequately. She assembled a minimal medical kit containing bandages, her herbal pain remedy, and basic tools for splinting broken bones. A safety line was secured around her waist, and she was given a small lantern and water flask. As she prepared to enter the narrow shaft, Thomas took her hand briefly. "Be careful," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than lengthy cautions would have. "I will," she promised. Then, with a final adjustment to her lantern, she began the difficult journey into the mountain. The ventilation shaft was even narrower than it had appeared from the outside, requiring Emma to wriggle through sections where the walls pressed against her shoulders on both sides. The air grew progressively warmer and more stale as she descended, making breathing increasingly difficult. Her small lantern cast eerie shadows on the rough-hewn walls, illuminating just enough space to navigate forward. Progress was painstakingly slow. In some places, Emma had to remove her supply pack and push it ahead of her before squeezing through particularly tight passages. Her world narrowed to the immediate challenge of movement, each hard-won foot of progress a small victory against the mountain's resistance. After what seemed like hours, but was likely less than 40 minutes, Emma reached a juncture where the ventilation shaft intersected with a larger tunnel, Tunnel 4, according to the schematics. She paused, listening intently in the oppressive silence of the mountain's interior. At first, she heard nothing beyond her own labored breathing and the occasional settling of rock. Then faintly came the sound she had been hoping for, a rhythmic tapping on metal pipes that ran along the tunnel walls, the universal distress signal of trapped miners. Emma tapped back, using the code Callahan had reviewed with her. 3 taps to ask direction, then waited. After a moment, 2 sets of taps responded from slightly different locations, suggesting the trapped miners were in 2 separate groups. Carefully, she began moving in the direction of the nearest signal, testing the stability of the tunnel with each step. The main collapse hadn't affected this section directly, but secondary damage was evident in cracked support beams and small rock falls that littered the path. When she finally reached the first group of trapped miners, the beam of her lantern revealed 3 men huddled in a small alcove where 2 tunnels intersected. Their faces, blackened with coal dust and strained with fear, transformed with astonishment at the sight of her. "Ma'am," one of them croaked in disbelief. "How in God's name—" "Secondary ventilation shaft," Emma explained succinctly, immediately, checking each man for injuries. One had a badly gashed leg that she quickly bandaged. Another suffered from what appeared to be a broken wrist. The third was physically intact, but showing signs of the air deprivation that was their greatest immediate. "Brett, can you walk?" she asked, already calculating whether they could navigate the narrow shaft through which she had entered. "Reckon so," the apparent leader of the group answered, "though Peterson here is light-headed from the bad air." He studied her with confusion still evident. "You're that woman Harrison brought in to marry his son, the one he sent away for being too mannish." "That's not exactly how I would phrase it," Emma replied dryly, helping the injured man secure his bandage. "But yes, I'm Emma Wilson. And right now, I'm your best chance of getting out of here before Harrison seals this mine with you still inside." That sobering statement eliminated any further questions about her presence or qualifications. Emma quickly explained the escape, a route, and the challenges it presented. "It's tight," she warned, "and you'll need to move carefully to avoid triggering additional collapses. But it's passable." "What about the others?" one miner asked. "There's 4 more men trapped further. In Jackson, Weber, Donnelly, and the new boy Parker." "I'll find them," Emma promised. "You 3 start making your way out following the safety line I've laid. There's a rescue team at the ventilation shaft entrance waiting to help." After ensuring the 3 miners understood the escape route, Emma continued deeper into the damaged tunnels, following the second set of taps she had heard earlier. The air quality deteriorated noticeably as she advanced, and portions of the ceiling had collapsed completely, requiring her to crawl through small spaces where the pressure of tons of rock seemed to press down from above. Her lantern light eventually revealed the second group of miners in a situation far more precarious than the first. A massive collapse had nearly sealed their section of tunnel, leaving only a small space near the ceiling through which limited air could circulate. 4 men were trapped, one unconscious with an apparent head wound, the others showing advanced signs of oxygen deprivation. "Help's here!" Emma announced, squeezing through the narrow opening to reach them. "But we need to move quickly. Harrison's given the rescue teams less than an hour before he seals the main shaft." The miners exchanged grim looks at this confirmation of their employer's priorities. Emma immediately checked the unconscious man, applying a compress to his head wound and administering her strongest herbal stimulant to try reviving him. "He needs to be carried," she determined after a brief examination, "and this passage is going to be extremely challenging." The next 30 minutes tested Emma's resolve and ingenuity to their limits. The unconscious miner, Parker, barely 17, and on his first week in the mines, had to be carefully maneuvered through the collapsed section by all of them working together. Once through that immediate obstacle, they faced the long journey back through tunnels that were becoming increasingly unstable as aftershocks from the main collapse continued to reverberate through the mountain. Emma led the way, constantly, testing for signs of imminent danger, directing the men around weakened sections, and monitoring the injured Parker, who had begun to show signs of returning consciousness. When they finally reached the ventilation shaft, a new problem emerged. The shaft was indeed too narrow for the miners to navigate while carrying their injured colleague. "We'll need to rig a drag system," Emma decided, quickly fashioning a makeshift harness from their belts and strips torn from their shirts. "He'll have to be pulled through the narrowest sections." The miners looked dubious, but offered no better alternative. With time running dangerously short, they secured Parker in the improvised harness and began the arduous process of extracting themselves from the mountain's grip. Emma went first, establishing the route and calling back guidance. For the difficult sections, the miners followed one by one, with Parker being carefully maneuvered between them. Their progress was agonizingly slow, each foot gained representing a significant victory against both the mountain and the ticking clock of Harrison's ultimatum. When Emma finally emerged from the ventilation shaft into the late afternoon sunlight, she was met with a scene of tense anticipation. Thomas rushed forward to help her out, his relief at her appearance obvious in his expression. The main rescue team is still 20 yards from reaching the trapped section, he informed her quickly. Harrison's becoming increasingly insistent about sealing the shaft. He's given them 15 more minutes. Emma nodded, immediately turning back to help extract the miners who were following her. There are 7 men coming out this way, she explained, one with a serious head injury who will need immediate attention. Word spread quickly that miners were emerging from the secondary route. As each dust-covered figure appeared from the narrow opening, cheers erupted from the gathered families. The injured Parker was carefully lifted from the shaft and placed on a stretcher, where Thomas immediately began examining him. The drama reached its peak as the final miner emerged, just as George Harrison's deadline expired. The mine owner had been pacing impatiently near the main entrance, periodically checking his pocket watch with evident irritation. When he realized that all the trapped miners had been rescued despite his timeline, his expression transformed from annoyance to suspicious anger. How did they? He began, striding toward the ventilation shaft where miners were being reunited with tearful family members. His eyes widened as he spotted Emma, her clothes filthy from the rescue effort, helping Thomas treat the injured Parker. "You," he accused, pointing a finger directly at her. "This was your doing." Emma straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Yes, Mr. Harrison. It was my suggestion that the old ventilation shaft might provide an alternative access point. Fortunately, I was right." Harrison's face darkened with fury. "You had no authority to interfere with my mining operation. This is private property, and you were trespassing." "Saving lives isn't trespassing," Emma replied calmly. "Though I imagine the territorial mining inspector might be interested in why those lives needed saving in the first place, particularly given the documented reports of ignored safety warnings." A murmur ran through the crowd of miners and family members who had gathered close enough to overhear the confrontation. Harrison glanced around, suddenly aware that he was surrounded by people who had nearly lost loved ones due to his negligence. This was an unavoidable accident, he declared, attempting to regain control of the narrative. Natural geological processes that no one could have predicted. "That's not true," a voice called from the crowd. It was one of the miners Emma had first rescued. "Foreman reported the rotting support timbers 3 months ago. We all saw the inspection report that got ignored. And last month, when that section of Tunnel 2 collapsed, we was told to just work around it," another miner added. "Said replacing the supports wasn't in the budget." More voices joined in, years of suppressed grievances suddenly finding expression in the wake of a disaster that could no longer be hidden or minimized. Harrison's face grew increasingly pale as he realized the shift in power that was occurring before his eyes. "This is insubordination," he finally sputtered. "Every man who speaks against company policy can consider himself unemployed effective immediately." "Then you'll have no workforce at all," Callahan, the rescue coordinator, stated flatly. "Because every man here has witnessed the same negligence. We've lost friends to your cost-cutting, Mr. Harrison. Today, we nearly lost 7 more." Thomas stepped forward, his medical authority lending additional weight to the confrontation. "I've documented 17 cases of injuries directly attributable to inadequate safety measures in this mine over the past year alone. That evidence can be presented to territorial authorities with a request for formal investigation." Harrison looked from face to face, seeking the deference he was accustomed to receiving and finding instead a unified resistance. Even his mine foreman stood with the workers, years of ignored warnings and dangerous compromises finally outweighing his loyalty to his employer. "This is absurd," Harrison declared, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "You need this mine. This town needs this mine. Without Harrison Enterprises, Pine Creek would collapse economically." "Perhaps," Thomas acknowledged. "But it would be the workers' choice to make that sacrifice, not yours, to force upon them through intimidation." Emma observed the confrontation with the same careful assessment she applied to all challenging situations. Harrison was dangerous, in his cornered state, but he was also facing a community unified by shared danger and the revelation of his callous disregard for their safety. "Mr. Harrison," she said, stepping forward, "these men don't want to destroy your mine. They want to work safely for fair compensation with proper equipment and maintenance. Surely there's a middle ground between closure and negligence." Harrison's eyes narrowed suspiciously at her reasonable tone. "And what would you know about mining operations, Miss Wilson? You who arrived in our community mere days ago?" "Nothing specifically about your operation," Emma conceded. "But I know that sustainable businesses don't sacrifice lives for short-term profits. My father managed a small mine in North Carolina that never experienced a serious accident because safety was prioritized over immediate returns." Before Harrison could respond, Robert appeared at the edge of the gathering, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he assessed the situation. "Father, what's happening here?" George Harrison turned to his son with evident relief at the reinforcement. "A minor accident that's been blown out of proportion by troublemakers and outside agitators." He glared pointedly at Emma and Thomas. Robert surveyed the scene. The injured miners being treated, the dust-covered men who had nearly died, the resolute faces of the community that had assembled to witness the confrontation. Unlike his father, he seemed to recognize the significance of the moment. "This doesn't look minor," he observed quietly, "and these men don't look like troublemakers. They look like our employees who nearly died today." The unexpected reasonableness from his son momentarily staggered George Harrison. Before he could recover, another voice joined the conversation, Martha Harrison, who had arrived in the family carriage unnoticed during the height of the confrontation. "George, this is a public relations disaster," she hissed, drawing her brother aside. "The territorial governor is currently visiting Oak Ridge. News of this will reach him by morning if we don't control the situation immediately." The mention of potential political consequences appeared to penetrate Harrison's anger, where appeals to humanity had failed. His expression shifted from defiance to calculation as he reassessed his position. "Very well," he announced after a brief whispered conference with his sister. "Silver Creek Mine will temporarily suspend operations pending a safety review. All workers will receive half wages during the shutdown." He turned to Callahan. "You'll oversee the immediate safety improvements with whatever budget is necessary to bring conditions up to proper standards." It was a stunning concession from a man who had never previously yielded on any meaningful point. The gathered miners exchanged glances of cautious optimism tinged with skepticism born of years of broken promises. "We'll need that in writing," Callahan said firmly. "Signed and witnessed." Harrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "My office tomorrow morning. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters requiring my attention." He turned and strode toward his waiting carriage, shoulders rigid with suppressed fury. Martha lingered a moment longer, her calculating gaze sweeping over the assembly before settling on Emma. "This isn't over, Miss Wilson," she said quietly. "You've won a skirmish, not the war." As the Harrisons departed, a tentative celebration began among the miners and their families. The immediate crisis had passed, and for the first time, they had secured meaningful concessions from their powerful employer. Whether those concessions would translate to lasting change remained to be seen, but the day's events had fundamentally altered the power dynamic in Pine Creek Valley. Thomas made his way to Emma's side as she helped the last of the injured miners into a wagon bound for town. "That," he said with quiet admiration, "was the most effective dismantling of Harrison authority I've witnessed in 5 years of residence here." Emma shrugged, suddenly conscious of her filthy appearance and exhaustion now that the emergency had passed. I just suggested an alternative rescue route. The miners themselves found the courage to speak truth about conditions they've endured. After you demonstrated that opposing the Harrisons wasn't futile, Thomas pointed out, your willingness to risk yourself for men you'd never met changed something fundamental in this community today. As they rode back to town in Thomas's wagon, Emma reflected on the unexpected trajectory her life had taken. She had arrived in Pine Creek expecting to begin a conventional life as a rancher's wife. Instead, she found herself at the center of a community's awakening to its own potential for self-determination. The following weeks brought significant changes to Pine Creek Valley. True to his word, and under the watchful eyes of both workers and territorial officials, George Harrison implemented comprehensive safety improvements at Silver Creek Mine. The operation resumed with new protocols that prioritized worker protection over maximum extraction rates. More subtly, but perhaps more significantly, the community's relationship with Harrison authority evolved. Shopkeepers who had previously acquiesced to every Harrison demand began establishing their own policies. The town council, while still influenced by Harrison interests, no longer approved every proposal without question or debate. Emma found her own place in this changing landscape. With Jenkins' enthusiastic support, she established a formal partnership with Billy Tanner that satisfied even the amended hunting ordinance. Their arrangement proved so successful that other hunters in the region began adopting Emma's more sustainable practices for tracking and dressing game. Her knowledge of herbal medicine became increasingly valued as well. Thomas invited her to assist regularly at his practice, combining her traditional remedies with his formal medical training to provide care that neither could offer alone. Their professional partnership gradually evolved into a deeper personal connection built on mutual respect and shared values. 3 months after her arrival in Pine Creek, Emma received an unexpected visitor at the boarding house. Robert Harrison arrived alone, without the arrogance that had characterized their previous encounters. "Miss Wilson," he began somewhat awkwardly, "I've come to apologize for my family's treatment of you since your arrival. It was unwarranted and unjust." Emma studied him with surprise, noting genuine discomfort in his normally confident demeanor. "That's an unexpected acknowledgement, Mr. Harrison." Robert nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The mine incident forced me to reevaluate many things I've accepted without question, including my father's judgment about what makes a suitable partner in this territory." He hesitated, then continued with evident sincerity. "Your courage and capability that day demonstrated qualities I should have recognized and valued immediately. Are you suggesting you now find me suitable?" Emma asked, unable to completely suppress a note of irony. Robert actually smiled at this, a genuine expression that transformed his features. "I'm suggesting that my father's rejection was the greatest stroke of luck you could have experienced. You've built something meaningful here entirely on your own terms." He glanced toward Thomas Miller's office across the street. "And I suspect you found a far better match than our arranged marriage would have provided." It was a surprisingly perceptive observation from a man she had previously dismissed as merely his father's son. "People can surprise you," Emma acknowledged, thinking not just of Robert, but of the entire community that had gradually accepted and then valued her unconventional skills. "Indeed they can," Robert agreed, "which is why I've come with a business proposal as well as an apology. The Harrison Ranch needs a hunting guide for visiting investors, someone who can track game others miss and ensure successful expeditions. It would be a professional arrangement with appropriate compensation." Emma considered the offer carefully. "Your father approved this proposal?" "Not exactly," Robert admitted, "but he's learning that change is inevitable. The mine incident demonstrated that quite effectively." 2 days later, as Emma prepared For her first official expedition as the Harrison Ranch's hunting guide, Thomas joined her on the boarding house porch. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, watching her check her rifle with practiced precision. "The Harrisons aren't known for relinquishing control easily." "I'm not giving them control," Emma replied calmly. "I'm providing a professional service, on terms I've established." She secured her rifle in its case. Besides, Robert seems genuinely interested in reforming certain aspects of Harrison operations. Having an ally within the family might prove valuable for the community's continued evolution. Thomas nodded, acknowledging the strategic thinking that matched his own approach to navigating Pine Creek's complicated social structure. "You've accomplished more in 3 months than most could in years," he observed. "This town will never be the same." Emma smiled as she shouldered her pack. "Change was inevitable. I just arrived at a moment when it was already beginning." She glanced around at the town that had initially rejected her, but now increasingly valued the very skills that had made her unsuitable as a bride. Sometimes the wrong door closing leads you exactly where you need to be. As she prepared to mount her horse, Thomas caught her hand. "Speaking of where one needs to be," he said, uncharacteristic uncertainty in his voice, "I've been meaning to ask if you might consider a more permanent arrangement regarding our medical partnership." His eyes held hers steadily. "And perhaps other partnerships as well." Emma's smile widened, warmth spreading through her at the invitation in his words. "I believe that could be arranged, Dr. Miller," she replied. "After all, I came to Pine Creek looking for a future. It just turned out to be a very different one than I expected." "A better one, I hope," Thomas said, his expression softer than his usually reserved demeanor allowed. "Infinitely better," Emma assured him, thinking of all that had transpired since that moment of rejection at the train station. The Harrisons had dismissed her for being too skilled for their narrow definition of womanhood. In doing so, they had inadvertently set her on a path to a life where those very skills were not just accepted, but valued, by a community finding its voice, and by a man who saw her capabilities as strengths to be admired rather than differences to be suppressed. As she rode out of town toward the Harrison Ranch, Emma Wilson reflected that some journeys led exactly where they were meant to, even when they followed unexpected paths. Her skills as a hunter, tracker, and healer, the very qualities deemed unsuitable in a proper bride, had ultimately revealed themselves as precisely what both she and Pine Creek needed. The mountains rose before her, magnificent in the morning light, offering challenges and opportunities that required exactly the strength she possessed. Emma adjusted her hat against the sun's glare and smiled. The future stretched before her, unwritten but full of promise, a trail she would navigate on her own terms with companions who truly valued all that she was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.